بغصن الزيتون في يدي وببندقية.
Attention, history enthusiasts and the curious about the past. Welcome once again to another intriguing chapter of Time Tale Theater. The conflict between Palestinians and Israelis is one of the longest-running and heated disputes of the modern era. This confrontation encompasses a complex set of causes and involves a wide range of actors, among whom is the group Hamas. To understand the complex scenario that has unfolded in Israel and Palestine in recent days, it is essential to delve into the characteristics and motivations of an influential organization like Hamas. Who they are and what drives Hamas adds an additional layer of depth to this story marked by passion and suffering. Their actions and aspirations have left an indelible mark on the region, impacting the lives of countless people. Exploring the roots and goals of Hamas is fundamental to understanding the backdrop of this ever-evolving conflict. Hamas is a group born in the midst of suffering and struggle in 1987 during the First Intifada, an uprising marked by courageous resistance against Israeli occupation. From its inception, this organization, which blends the political with the paramilitary, pledged the destruction of Israel and carried out numerous suicide bombings and other deadly acts against Israeli civilians and soldiers. Its reputation is so shadowed that the European Union and several Western nations classify it as a terrorist organization. Surprisingly, Hamas won parliamentary elections in 2006 and then violently took control of the Gaza Strip in 2007, wresting it from the Palestinian Authority, which enjoys international recognition. The Palestinian Authority, led by its rival, Al-Fatah, governs semi-autonomous areas in the West Bank, also under Israeli occupation. In response, Israel imposed a suffocating blockade on Gaza, limiting the entry and exit of people and goods, arguing that this was necessary to prevent the development of weapons by Hamas. However, this measure has wreaked havoc on Gaza's economy, and Palestinians consider it collective punishment. Over the years, Hamas has received support from Arab countries like Qatar and Turkey. More recently, it has strengthened ties with Iran and its allies. Amidst all this complexity, deep suffering and a constant struggle loom in the region, where tragedy and conflict seem to have no end. This group, which led a devastating attack on Israel in October, with tragic consequences, has its roots in the First Intifada, a period of conflict between Palestinians and Israelis that spanned from 1987 to 1993 when the Oslo Peace Accords were signed. From its beginnings, Hamas has been a dissident voice, strongly opposed to the existence of Israel and any attempts to reach a peace agreement with the Hebrew state. Over more than 30 years, its political influence has grown, as has its clashes with Israel, which considers it a terrorist group. When Hamas emerged in 1987, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict had already occupied the international stage for decades, with several wars between Arab countries and Israel. Hamas was born in a context of escalating conflicts between Palestinian territories, which were then under Israeli occupation, and the State of Israel. It established itself as a nationalist, Islamist, and jihadist group, characteristics that set it apart from the Palestinian resistance that had prevailed until then. The name, Hamas, is an acronym that stands for Islamic Resistance Movement, and drew inspiration from the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, a party that opposed secular political pathways. Among its founders was the influential Imam Ahmed Yassin, a legendary figure in the history of Palestine. Yassin was critical of the approach of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, led for years by the iconic Yasser Arafat. Arafat advocated for political currents linked to socialism and pan-Arabism, popular in the Middle East in the 1960s and 1970s. However, Yassin criticized these positions for their association with what he considered Western trends. For him, the struggle against Israel was as crucial as the preservation of Sharia, Islamic law, as the cornerstone of a future Palestinian state. During the First Intifada, Hamas played a growing but moderate role, as the most prominent figure in Palestinian resistance was Yasser Arafat. However, from the 1990s, Hamas's role in Palestinian politics expanded thanks to two key factors: the creation of an armed wing called the Ezzedine al-Qassam Brigades and its relentless opposition to any kind of peace agreement. In a conflict marked by passion and history, the emergence of Hamas added an additional layer of complexity to an already emotionally intense situation. Hamas's ideology is a fusion of nationalism and political Islam, drawing inspiration from Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. From a religious perspective, we could say they follow Salafism, St. Hamas's ideology is a fusion of nationalism and political Islam, drawing inspiration from Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. From a religious perspective, we could say they follow Salafism, a strict interpretation of Islam. As a result, their political vision focuses on the pursuit of a Palestinian state, nationalism, governed by Sharia, Islamic law. This combination of nationalism and religion gives Hamas a unique and powerful identity. As they strive for their cause, they seek to establish a state that reflects both their national aspirations and deep Islamic faith. This ideological fervor is a driving force behind their actions and decisions, and in the midst of a conflict as complex and emotional as the one involving Palestine and Israel, Hamas's ideology remains a determining factor in the region's political landscape. Since its inception, Hamas has advocated violence as a means to liberate Palestinian lands under occupation and has expressed a desire to see Israel annihilated. Over time, this organization has carried out suicide bombings and fired increasingly lethal rockets from Gaza into Israel. Additionally, they have built an intricate network of tunnels extending from Gaza to Egypt, used to smuggle weapons, as well as tunnels that penetrate Israeli territory. Recently, Hamas seemed more focused on governing Gaza than launching attacks on Israel. However, its political evolution is as complex as its rhetoric. In its founding charter of 1988, they called for the liberation of all of Palestine, stating that Israel must disappear in some way. Although in 2010, they revised their principles to acknowledge the objective fact of the existence of an Israeli state. They maintained their fundamental goals. Those goals include self-determination, ending Israeli occupation in Palestinian territories, and the return of refugees to their homes, many of which are within Israel. Hamas has remained staunch and unwavering in advocating for Palestinian rights, contributing to its image of radicalism. Nevertheless, it is important to note that all Palestinian political factions have military branches and resort to armed force in a way that does not align with humanitarian law, which could be considered terrorist actions. In this complex and emotionally charged struggle, Hamas pursues the realization of Palestinian rights, while the conflict in the region continues to inflict deep and enduring suffering. The Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, is a coalition of political and paramilitary movements that emerged in 1964 under the auspices of the Arab League. Since 1974, the Arab League has recognized it as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and that same year, the UN General Assembly recognized it as an observer for the Palestinian people. However, Hamas differs from other groups in a crucial aspect: its stance on the Oslo process. The Oslo Accords, signed in 1993 between Israel and the PLO, aimed to achieve a political solution for peace between the two parties. Sadly, these agreements did not achieve their objectives, and the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories continued. This failure of the Oslo process strengthened Hamas, as they argued it would be ineffective. With growing popular support for Hamas, they achieved a landslide victory in the Palestinian legislative elections of 2006. It is important to highlight that the PLO and Hamas have different approaches. While the PLO supported the Oslo Accords, Hamas remained opposed. Although the Palestinian militia attempted to integrate into the PLO, they never reached an agreement. This division among Palestinian groups adds complexity to the struggle for Palestinian liberation and the quest for a just and lasting solution in the region. Amid these differences, emotions and tensions remain high, and the hope for peace remains elusive. Labeling Hamas simply as a terrorist group is a complex and challenging matter. Despite international efforts to define and categorize terrorism precisely, the classification of Hamas remains ambiguous in many aspects. While the United Nations, the European Union, the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, Paraguay, the Organization of American States, and Egypt consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization, other countries like Switzerland, Norway, Russia, Brazil, Turkey, and China do not. This discrepancy in recognition can be better understood by considering what was mentioned earlier. It is important to note that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, although currently banned, has at different times and in front of various actors been considered a legitimate political movement. This divergence in opinions and labels reflects the complexity of the situation and the deep emotions surrounding the conflict in the region. The classification of Hamas is not just a matter of definitions but also a topic loaded with political and moral implications that continues to be a subject of international debate. In the Gaza Strip, we often see Hamas and Islamic Jihad joining forces in opposition to Israel. Islamic Jihad, the second largest militant group in the region, often acts independently and focuses primarily on military confrontation. At times, Hamas has pressured this group to halt attacks or retaliations against Israel, or in other cases, it has remained on the sidelines while Islamic Jihad faced off against Israel. The relationship between these two groups is complex and often adapts to changing circumstances. Hamas has allies in the Middle East, such as Syria, and collaborates with entities like the Shiite group Hezbollah in Lebanon, all of which oppose U.S. and Israeli policies. One of the staunchest backers of Hamas is Iran, which has its own interests in the fight against Israel. For decades, Iran has provided Hamas with weapons, technology, and training to build its own arsenal of advanced rockets capable of reaching deep into Israeli territory. In this tense and conflict-ridden environment, the alliances and support for Hamas reflect the complex web of interests and rivalries in the region, adding an additional emotional and political element to an already deeply harrowing conflict. In recent years, Israel has managed to achieve peace agreements with Arab nations without making significant concessions in its conflict with the Palestinians. Furthermore, the United States has attempted to mediate an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, a fierce rival of Hamas's Iranian sponsors. In the midst of all this, Israel's new far-right government has been working to consolidate Israeli settlements in the West Bank, despite strong Palestinian opposition and international condemnation. Hamas leaders argue that Israeli repression of militants in the West Bank, the ongoing construction of settlements deemed illegal by the international community, the detention of thousands of Palestinians in Israeli prisons, and the relentless blockade of Gaza have been the driving forces behind their recent attack. In this emotionally charged context, Hamas has responded to a series of factors that have escalated tensions in the region and caused deep suffering on both sides of the conflict. The result is a spiral of violence that affects the lives of countless people in the region, and the hope for a peaceful solution remains elusive. In conclusion, Hamas, a group born in the midst of suffering and struggle in 1987 during the First Intifada, has become a central player in the protracted conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. This organization, which combines political and paramilitary elements, has pledged the destruction of Israel and has carried out numerous acts of violence, leading to its classification as a terrorist organization by the European Union and several Western nations. The origin of Hamas dates back to the First Intifada, a period of conflict that spanned from 1987 to 1993, marked by courageous resistance against Israeli occupation. Its ideology combines nationalism with political Islam, and its goal is to establish a Palestinian state governed by Islamic law. Over the years, Hamas has evolved and influenced the region's political landscape. Despite its changes, its commitment to the struggle for Palestinian rights remains unwavering. Hamas distinguishes itself from other Palestinian groups, like the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, in its approach to the Oslo process. While the PLO supported these agreements, Hamas remained opposed, causing divisions in Palestinian resistance. The classification of Hamas as a terrorist group is a complex and controversial issue. While some nations label it as such, others do not, reflecting the complexity of the situation and the deep emotions surrounding the conflict. Regarding its international allies and supporters, Hamas often joins forces with Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip against Israel. It also enjoys support from countries and groups in the Middle East, such as Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran, all of which share its opposition to U.S. and Israeli policies. Hamas's recent attack on Israel has occurred in a context of escalating tensions, where the lack of progress in the peace process, settlement construction, Israeli repression in the West Bank, and the Gaza blockade have contributed to a climate of desperation and conflict. In summary, the story of Hamas is a tragic narrative of suffering, struggle, and challenges in the midst of a conflict deeply rooted in the history and emotions of the region. The hope for a peaceful solution remains elusive, and suffering continues to affect countless people on both sides of the conflict. We hope that this deep dive into recent history has been a fascinating and enlightening experience for all of you. If you wish to continue exploring the mysteries and intrigues of other historical moments, we encourage you to stay connected with our channel and subscribe to not miss future episodes. We leave you with the video where we explain how Hamas managed to break through Israel's defenses with a lightning attack. We sincerely appreciate your company on this journey and remind you that, through understanding and reflection, we can forge a future where humanity chooses the path of truth and wisdom over darkness and secrecy.